Welcome to Tearing Off, the side series I make since animation takes time and I gotta fill in the gaps somehow. And it's been about 2 years since I started making videos involving this little shit I've named Nuggin. I figured it would be interesting to talk about my thought process when designing them, especially considering I've gone on to tweak the characters so many times, with the next video I make featuring what's hopefully their final design. Before I get into Nuggin though, I first need to bring up an old animation I made when I was in high school. Around 2023, I was wrapping up my senior year and was tasked with a senior project. I was given complete creative control, I could do whatever I wanted within reason, and so I partnered up with a buddy to make a game called Fight of the Bumblebee. It was a little more complicated than that. Initially, the whole class was forced into a competition that my friend and I dropped out of, but that's a story for another day. Or probably not, actually. Anyways, fast forward a little and the project was scrapped. While our character and environment designs were solid enough, my skills as a programmer were lacking. To make matters worse, this all happened about 2 months before our projects were due. So everything was going great. It was around this time that I was listening to Dead Man's Bones, specifically their song In the Room Where You Sleep, and something about that just sparked something in me. I imagined different pictures sliding on screen during a certain segment, and I knew I had to animate something surrounding that. In turn, that reminded me of an idea I had in my head for the longest time, a character and a story concept inspired by Omori that involved a kid who dreamed about their own death, dying over and over in various brutal ways. After a month's worth of working at both home and school, I managed to make a short fan-made music video. It's still up on my channel to this day, though I will say it got away with a lot, and it's quite gruesome in some areas. I genuinely don't know how I got away with anything in that video, especially in a classroom setting. Gore and photosensitivity warnings for those of you who seek it out. It ain't hard to find. The video itself is subpar by my standards now, and I wouldn't mind going back to remake it at some point, but that's a project for later. I'm sure you're asking what this video has to do with the funny paper person who gets shot, set on fire, or otherwise brutalized every other video. The truth is, however indirectly it may have been, the character in the music video pretty well served as something of a proto-Nuggin, especially in Nuggin's earlier designs. Unfortunately, I lost the files, but early on I intended on Nuggin's more simple design to be a purely stylistic choice, with full sleeves coming into detail as I got closer to the camera. And wouldn't you know it, they look rather similar to the character in the music video. Even in premise, there's concepts here that align rather closely, but that's for some other time and maybe place. Right now I want to get into their previous designs, starting with the first video I ever used Nuggin in. And oh boy, is their design rough here. I think the best part is the fact that you could tell I didn't have any form of model sheet or reference at the time, evidenced by the fact that Nuggin slowly gets smaller and smaller as the video progresses. Something I would actually like to mention is the fact that this specific iteration of Nuggin was drawn and animated entirely in Blender. This was back when I was going for a Sea and City type of vibe, so I wanted to have Nuggin in a 3D space easily. And since I didn't know how to import images as transparent planes just yet, I settled on drawing them using grease pencil. Using grease pencil did have its advantages, namely the fact that I would be able to automate the boiling lines to complete the doodle look I was going for. It also allowed me to make Nuggin far more expressive and animated since I was animating Nuggin over an audio recording when I was making the Super Mario Land 2 video. But it also had its disadvantages. Case in point, Nuggin doesn't have their paper texture here, and I really feel like that takes a lot away from them. I'd also like to mention that Nuggin was always meant to be a doodle. Later I would tack on the factoid that they were scrawled on a fourth-dimensional piece of paper to explain why they seemed relatively 3D. Without the paper texture, you don't quite get that idea. Moving on to the next video, and this is where I'd say I was a lot more confident in their design. I knew that drawing Nuggin over and over again using grease pencil would be a pain when making videos, so at the cost of making them less expressive, I switched to stills. I made sure to trace over poses to give them a little more life, but I'd soon replace this with a somewhat crummy boiling effect when editing and organization became a pain. It's pretty much just a refined version of the original design I made, nothing much else to say there. Although this was the start of me using straight up triangles for the tufts of hair that stick out the top of Nuggin's head. This won't be the last one up until the Sonic 3 video, where I would slightly change the design again to this. By all means, I know it's minor, but the thing that bugs me about this specific design is how much longer I made the triangular tufts of hair. It really fucks with me, and I'm pretty sure I also made Nuggin smaller for some reason. I don't really remember why I altered their design here. Maybe I felt like I could do better and this was the result or something. Regardless, it's not my finest work. Don't get me wrong, I never imagined Nuggin being very tall to begin with, but I messed with their proportions way too much here. And finally, after about 4 months of being unable to work on anything related to the channel, I decided I would redesign the entirety of the set from the ground up, including Nuggin for the Sonic Mania video. The goal this time around was to make Nuggin more expressive and overhaul my organization so I could bring back the original method of boiling that I felt both looked better than the automated boiling I came up with and fit Nuggin from a design perspective. Again, they're supposed to be a doodle that came to life, so they should have boiling lines. I feel like it gives the stills I make a little more life than they would have otherwise. As you could probably tell in the video itself, I failed to deliver on the boiling thing, but I have managed to somewhat improve the boiling effect I've cooked up in Caden Live, so hopefully I shouldn't have to worry about that going forward, however inefficient the solution may be. I hope that Nuggin feels a lot more expressive here than they were in their prior stills. I really wanted to push those poses, and it's something I've done my best to maintain in Nuggin's latest poses and design. I feel like I have a tendency to go for stiff posing when it comes to Nuggin, which is something I'd rather like to avoid, since this channel is supposed to be animation mixed with games for the most part. The visual component, while possibly overlooked, is still important to me. One small detail I did actually add were the little fangs in Nuggin's mouth. I was drawing these stills around Halloween, and I figure if Nuggin were to have dressed up as anything, it would have either been the Headless Horseman or a vampire of some kind. Plus, I feel like giving them sharp teeth that often show, similar to the recurring gag of Nuggin's tongue sticking out whenever their mouth is closed, makes them feel more goober-ish. Overall, I was okay with Nuggin's original design for the most part. Most of the reasons why I wound up changing it so many times was because I either felt like I could draw Nuggin a little better, or I felt like my structuring of the systems I put in place needed tweaking for the sake of making it a little easier on me when I'm making videos. That about wraps up Nuggin's original variants, so now it's time to get into why I made the decisions I made with Nuggin. Before I get into that, I would like to mention the fact that I'm not a professional character designer. That's just something I get into for fun, so take some of these ideas with a grain of salt. I always liked paper aesthetics. Loved them since I was a kid. As a matter of fact, I remember hearing Paper Mario for the first time when I was around 6 or 7 and thinking of a crumpled up print of Mario's Super Mario Land 2 sprites moving around sort of like a stop motion animation. I suppose in a roundabout way, that was one of the core memories that seeded the idea of Nuggin being a doodle. There's more than just that reason, of course. I knew that if I was going to make a video on Super Mario Land 2 with animated bits, it would have been a pain if I gave Nuggin a whole lot of detail and complex anatomy. Adding color on top of that, a process I really don't enjoy all too much as is, and making Nuggin a simple black and white character was inevitable, really. It makes the animation process miles easier, not to mention faster. The only really annoying part about Nuggin is filling in those scribbles where normally completely black fills would be, and even then I've started moving on to a pattern in Clip Studio Paint just to make the process a little less intensive on my wrist and arm. I rather like not having carpal tunnel. Thank you very much. And finally, the biggest reason I made Nuggin a doodle to begin with, I love 2D characters in 3D spaces. When I first started making videos about games that were cool and good, I think, I knew I wanted to do something along those lines. What better way to explain why a character was 2D than to make him a doodle that came to life? It was supposed to be the whole aesthetic of the channel, in fact. I didn't really see that many creators on YouTube that mix 2D and 3D animation or use doodles as a stand-in for themselves, save for Krugston and Noodle. As mentioned earlier, I am a total sucker for those old CN City bumpers, seeing all the Cartoon Network characters interact, living their daily lives. They're doing something as simple as going to the laundromat or the grocery store, all in that charming 2D, 3D hybrid style. It's pure art to me, and it's a shame you don't see stuff like that all too often, which is exactly why I wanted to do something like it. Going away from the doodle aspect of Nuggin and into the actual design, I knew I wanted them to be simple. Again, it would have been a pain to animate a 2D character with a complex design, and puppet animation isn't really my specialty. It would have just looked stiff since I would have been so new to the process, and while it's something I should probably learn, that's definitely on the back burner right now. Most of the character designs I make in my spare time are typically really simple to begin with, but Nuggin is exceedingly simple even for me. I try to give all my characters really strong silhouettes. It's something of a rule of thumb when it comes to character design in general. I find that having fewer parts to work with, at least in my case, tends to lead to overall stronger silhouettes and designs. That's not to say that a complicated design or more detail makes for a poor silhouette or a bad design, but I feel the point of a simple character design is to make the strongest silhouette possible with as little parts as possible. Take Sonic, for instance. Overall, Sonic's design is fairly straightforward. A rubber hose-esque character with a unit eye, muzzle, white gloves, and red shoes with a white strap and gold buckle on them. Sonic's quills function both as his hair and his main defining trait that, even in poor light, stands out. You would immediately know you're looking at Sonic because of the shape of his quills, even without any of the other details. Despite Sonic's straightforward design, he's incredibly recognizable. A part of me thinks that the big reason why Sonic's design is so striking is precisely because it's so simple. Naoto Oshima was designing Sonic as a mascot for Sega, which was going to have a game for the Genesis. He literally couldn't put too much detail into Sonic thanks to sprite limitations. So, what do you do when you have to be simple? When you have all those crushing limitations weighing you down? You make one damn striking design with the limited colors and shapes you have. That's why I tend to lean more towards simple designs. To me, a simple design can be 10 times more effective than one that has an immense amount of detail, and it's that same mentality that I carried over to Nuggin. Plus, in animation, you generally want to simplify your designs as to not forget certain details later. I feel like the biggest defining aspect of Nuggin's design is their hair. It's the part that stands out the most, especially when they've been silhouetted. Now, this is possibly the part that actually had the least amount of thought put into it, ironically enough. I sort of just slapped curly hair on the little shit and called it a day. Bear in mind that Nuggin was always supposed to be something of a stand-in for me, although I like to think they've evolved past that and become something something of their own person in my head. Either or, I put them in a sleeveless version of my favorite hoodie, gave them curly hair with 2 tufts of hair sticking out of their scalp, and pointy shoes since they were easy to draw, and called it a day. I did deliberately choose some aspects though. The main goal I had in mind was to make sure I made a design that people could look at and sort of chuckle. In other words, Nuggin was literally designed to look stupid. A lot of the process boiled down to a bit of trial and error, but I really like the idea of Nuggin's mouth always going off of their face. It makes no anatomical sense, which is exactly why I made that decision. As mentioned earlier, that's also why I gave them 2 sharp teeth, almost like fangs. I feel like it makes them look more goober-ish and silly. Of course, the other decision I made was making sure that whenever their mouth was closed, their tongue would be sticking out. Part of that was to ensure that I stuck to the rule of Nuggin's mouth always going off the edge of their face, but it originated as a small joke and just stuck around ever since. All of that came together to make a character I was okay with drawing. Yeah, as time went on, I came to dislike this design I gave Nuggin. That feeling that I could do better came back again, and I would eventually redesign them. I'll likely cover that design at some other point, after I've used it in a video outside of this side series. More specifically, the unique challenge I faced as a result of the choices I made with Nuggin's original design. Until then, I'll be chipping away at whatever project comes to my mind next, however long that may take. Thanks for watching this very self-indulgent video on the design of what is effectively my online persona. I know that ultimately that's what Nuggin is, but I actually wouldn't mind doing something more with them, be it some kind of comic or animation, maybe even something away from YouTube at some point. Well, time to cap this off with a sarcastic end bit that I've done the past 3 videos.